They just connected with us, real solidly. And so I just didn't hesitate at all when I called up and said, we'll just break up. Lowell has he's published several books of poetry, he's gotten several prizes, and I'm just real happy to have you back. Thanks.
Were any of you in the first hour that I taught? I guess it's, you were there. Well, this will be different, a little bit. What I want to do is I want to debunk a myth a little bit. Sometimes people think that writers are like very smart people that are saying things that people in school like you have to figure out, right? I don't think that's the way writing gets done at all. I think what happens is that I feel, as a writer, what happens with me is that there's some sort of small miracles that happen when I engage with language that say things and teach me things that I didn't know were there at all. In fact, I don't think were there at all, okay? So what I've got here is a group of poems that I would like to read to you that kind of shows you this process of where the poems come from. And the first thing I want to tell you about is where I teach up at Flathead Valley Community College. I teach creative writing up there, and we do this little exercise where I have them close their eyes and they imagine themselves in this completely blank place, you know, nothing around at all, nothing at all. They open their eyes and there's nothing there but, oh, that's great.
Wow, clock.
They open their eyes and there's nothing there but you know, sand that they're walking on, just sort of blank terrain in all directions, and nothing in the sky except the sun directly overhead. And then they notice that the sun is moving towards one horizon, and I tell them to start walking that way, walking over the sand towards that horizon. You know, pretty soon they're walking. The sun is getting lower and lower, and they realize there's a body of water out there, and they walk, and the sun is getting lower and lower, and they realize that the body of water is an ocean. It's huge, and now they can hear the waves crashing up on the beach, and they hear the waves crashing up, and they walk towards the waves, and pretty soon they're on the beach, and I tell them to turn so the sun that is now setting on that horizon is on their right shoulder, and walk along the beach, take off their shoes, roll up their pants legs, and walk in the water. And as they're walking in the water, and the waves are crashing up against their legs, see this sort of rhythm to all that? You see how it kind of lulls you asleep in a funny way? The waves are crashing up against their legs like that. And then they look down and they notice that with every wave that comes in, all this junk is being washed up. Just stuff of the world. Things out of people's garages and houses and pockets and glove boxes and purses. You know, and as if there were a zillion shipwrecks up there, and all the stuff of the world is being washed up against the shore like that. And then I tell them, I say, reach down and grab something. And they reach down and they grab something. Of course, in their imagination, they're doing this. They reach down and they grab something. And I say, look at it now. Hold it in your hand and look at it and touch it. And if there's any words on it, read it. If there's a box, open it. You know, what does it smell like? Where do you think it came from? Really study this thing. Look at it very closely. You know. Then I tell them, throw it away. Because you see, up until that point, they thought, oh, I know what he's going to do. They're going to have me write about this. He's going to have me write about this thing that I just pulled up out of the ocean, right? And so they're still pretty conscious of that. When I tell them to throw it away, then all of a sudden they're shocked. They're like, what's the meaning of this? We just threw this. Now, I say, reach down and take the next thing. So they reach in the waves and they take the next thing. And now I tell them to touch it, and taste it, and smell it, and look at it, etc. And this is the thing that we write about. Well, every time I do that assignment with them, and every time I reach down in the waves, the first time around I come up with something pretty predictable. I make jewelry, so I come up usually with some sort of like gem or neat thing that would be perfect for me to write about. Not at all perfect for me to write about. You know why? Because I'd be too much in control. So that next time I reach down in there, I pull up really stupid things. Like in this case, I pulled up an Electrolux vacuum cleaner. You know? And my first thought is, how on earth can I make a poem out of an Electrolux vacuum cleaner? That's really stupid. I'm going to fail. No way on earth I can write a poem about something like that. But you know what? That's perfect. That's just perfect. And the little voice in me says, well, perfect, because you're entirely lost. I have no idea. Whatever's going to come now is going to come from somewhere beyond me, because it is bigger than I am, or, you know, I know nothing about Electrolux vacuum cleaners. So the first thing I do is I sit down and I just sort of start scribbling. The very first thoughts that come to my mind, probably images. You know, I know you're a film class, right? And so you deal with images a lot. The first thing that comes to my mind usually when I begin writing is images. I picture that Electrolux vacuum cleaner that I was holding in my hand, right? And I describe whatever it is I know about it. And usually the pictures lead me into some sort of story. And the story leads me into some sort of surprise, something really meaningful that I didn't think about beforehand. Okay, so here's the poem. I'll give you an example of this in the poem. It's called Electrolux. I remember reading that name, the letters bannered across the canister of the old vacuum my mother drug over the kitchen linoleum and the battered shag of the living room rug. I was old enough to figure some things out alone. I'd seen paper clips, bobby pins, and cake crumbs, and candy wrappers all vanish into the flexible hose of elaborate attachments. Part of every weekend, my mother unlatched the bag, a canvas bag, not the disposable sort we use today, and she shook it empty into newspapers spread over the breakfast table. She feared losing something precious sucked up by accident, never more than a jingle bell at Christmas or a small sum of plastic beads I'd scattered trying to stitch myself a chieftain's headdress for the merit badge I never did earn. And I never earned the one about electricity either, which almost killed my old man the day he disassembled the Electrolux in the next room with the power cord snaked around the corner where I sat beside the outlet one Saturday morning watching rerun cartoons. I figured when I plugged in that cord, I'd hear nothing if the Electrolux switch was off, but I'd hear noise if it was on. At that instant, my dad had a hand and a screwdriver on either pole of the motor's terminal. It was the morning I burned into my brain the name Electrolux, the morning my dad blew a fuse, the last spanking I recall. I was old enough to figure some things out alone. I sat in my room till dusk, shocked into contemplation, wary of connections buried in the walls and the unseen currents surrounding us all. Could you follow that story? Yeah, I knew you could. I saw you smiling. Can you tell me? Tell me. So what happened?
She plugged it in and electrocuted it.
Okay. Didn't electrocuted, I think, means you actually died. He didn't die, but okay. That's it. So you saw that in your mind, didn't you? As I was reading this, in your imagination, you could see it going on. You know. Well, I'm going to tell you something about this poem. See, I didn't see it going on before I started writing it. I just started writing about what that vacuum cleaner looked like. You know, I said, I remember the letters, how the name, they had carved the names out, bannered across the canister. That's what they called the vacuum canister, right? Of the old vacuum. And I thought, I remember my mother spreading the newspapers on the kitchen table and then emptying out that old vacuum cleaner bag and sorting through that stuff to see what was in there. I thought, what was in there? Well, there's paper clips and bobby pins and, you know, crumbs and stuff. And I thought, oh yeah, those plastic beads. And I thought, oh, she hated those beads because if you got them on the linoleum of the kitchen and you stepped on them, they made these like pock marks, you know. And she just was always mad at me for losing those beads all over. I thought, well, what on earth was what was I doing with those beads? I thought, oh yeah, I was trying to be an Indian for a while. And I was in Boy Scouts or something, and I was stitching this beaded stuff to make a big Indian costume, you know. And then I thought, well, gee, I never did finish that, did I? You know, and I thought, well, you know, I was supposed to get some sort of, I never did get that merit. I thought, I never got any merit badge. You see how that all was happening in the poem? That's how the poem starts thinking for me, you see? And I'm going on this little journey. I never got any merit badge. Even, I remember one about electricity, and I thought, gee, that would have really helped it. Oh my gosh, suddenly I realized what the poem was all about. The time I was watching cartoons one Saturday morning and looked at that power cord and thought, well, I'm really a smart kid. If I plug it in and the switch is on, I'll hear it. But if I plug it in and if it's not on, I won't hear anything, right? And I plug it in and I hear, it's my dad on the other end, right? Fixing the thing, right? See, and that's how the poem came. I didn't think of that beforehand. Remember, I just reached down into the waves and I got that vacuum cleaner. And I thought, how stupid. You can't make a poem out of a vacuum cleaner. But you know what? It was a high school person who said to me, he said, I see that pun in the last stanza. And I thought, pun? And I said, well, you do. Tell us about it, right? Because I didn't see it. And he said, well, you're punning on the word shocked. See, it says, I was old enough to figure some things out alone. I sat in my room till dusk, shocked into contemplation. I said, oh yeah, I am. I'm punning. That's shocked, right? My dad's shocked, but I'm shocked. You know, and another kid's shaking his head. And I said, well, what are you shaking your head about? He says, well, you were literally shocked. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you know, when you're surprised and you have this chemical electrical reaction where electrical charges actually jump around your body, you know, through those synapses in your nerves. You learned about that stuff, right, in school? And I'd forgotten that I'd learned about that. But you see what's in language there? I didn't think about that as a writer, but suddenly that word shocked makes more sense than anything there, doesn't it? I mean, I was shocked figuratively, and I was shocked literally. I shared that with my father in being shocked. And I say I was shocked into contemplation. See how the poem worked? And so it's not me who's doing the thinking here. It's the poem that's doing the thinking. I learned from the poem. And then I learned again when I read the poem and the high school student told me what was there. See how that works? And oftentimes I think where we get mixed up in teaching poetry and literature in general is we think that the author is this all-smart person who is putting these messages there that students like you have to figure out, right? Not so. Literature is a thing that sort of happens, I think, to writers like it maybe happens to you too. Do you ever get in a good conversation with a friend and you're just talking, and pretty soon you're really getting into something serious and you hear yourself say something and all of a sudden you stop dead and you go, wow, did I say that? That was really smart. Where'd that come from? You ever have that feeling? That's what I think it feels like to write a poem. You know, it's a surprise at the end. He goes, where'd that come from? You know? Right? Let me try another one for you. This is the same exercise. This time I reached down in the waves and I pulled up a meat grinder. You ever seen those things? You know, you can get them in all second-hand stores now. They clamp on here and you turn the handle and you grind meat, right? Well, I reached down, you know, the first time I came up with a nice gemstone or something that I'd be just dying to write about. I had to throw it away, reached down the second time, and now I get this meat grinder. And I go, can't make a poem out of a meat grinder. That's absolutely ridiculous. What a silly thing. But another voice in me says, perfect. Perfect. You're ready to write. You're ready for a poem to come to you because you're empty. You know nothing. Right? One of my favorite little poems is 2 lines long. It's by a Chinese poet called Li Po, and he wrote, the poet is a hollow bamboo. The poet is a hollow bamboo. What's a hollow bamboo? You know, an empty space, like a flute, you know, or like a tube that something can pass through, that water can run through, that something can move through, right? A hollow bamboo. Empty, though. Empty. Not full. Empty. Not, a writer, I think, is not full of themselves. They have to somewhere be empty and open up so that other things can happen. So I reach down in the waves and I pull out this meat grinder and I think, no way I'm going to make a poem this time. I'm going to be embarrassed. My students are going to see me fail. But I start scribbling and I just describe the first thing that comes to my mind, you know, the first image again, right? Image. And then that image leads me to story, and then story leads me to meaning. And at the end I go, where'd that come from? You know, but it's an enjoyable thing. Yeah? Here's the poem, The Meat Grinder. It gets really Freudian at the end. See? And in school then they'd think that I was being Freudian. See if you can hear that part. The meat grinder. Mother clamped it to the chopping block, and I remember her shoving long hunks of bologna into the hopper at the top, turning the crank, and through the grinder's iron teeth squirt ground sausage into the bowl below. She yanked the crank with lots of muscle, always throwing her weight into it, as if the handle were heavy or the sausage tough, as if it had to be done quickly with all the determination it takes, say like ripping a bandage from a wound. Then I tried because I'd asked. I was surprised how easy it was, how the sausage, when I cranked, flowed, made no resistance, and even if I worked slowly, the job was over too soon. I was 6 or 7 and felt I must be very strong, much stronger than my mother, to master this task so easily. Now I wonder so many years afterwards by the sweat of my mother's brow. What relish she found manhandling that meat grinder. How she tore the butcher paper back as if she were afraid of sausages, as if she couldn't resist doing them a pronounced, underhanded violence. Well, I wrote that poem, and I thought, you know, that is a childhood memory of my mother grinding up all that sausage, you know, back in Wisconsin where I grew up. They make deer sausage and stuff, and my mother would grind up those big sausages. But she wouldn't just grind them up, she'd go, right? Really, and I remember that, you know, as a kid somewhere, something registered to me, but I didn't know what registered to me. By the time I finished that poem, I realized my mother had been pregnant 10 times in her life. Now do you understand the poem? Do you? Or are you just afraid to talk about it? Anybody?
I don't understand.
Anybody? She's brave. She said she didn't understand it. I'm glad she did what you said. Huh? Anybody want to try it? How do you explain it? Should we read it once more? Let's try it once more. See if you can tell me about this poem. The meat grinder. Mother clamped it to the chopping block, and I remember her shoving long hunks of bologna into the hopper at the top, turning the crank, and through the grinder's iron teeth squirt ground sausage into the bowl below. She yanked the crank with lots of muscle, always throwing her weight into it, as if the handle were heavy or the sausage tough, as if it had to be done quickly, say with all the determination it takes, like ripping a bandage from a wound. Then I tried because I'd asked. I was surprised how easy it was, how the sausage, when I cranked, flowed, made no resistance, and even if I worked slowly, the job was over too soon. I was 6 or 7 and felt I must be very strong, much stronger than my mother to master this task so easily. Now I wonder, so many years afterward, by the sweat of my mother's brow, what relish she found manhandling that meat grinder, how she tore the butcher paper back as if she were afraid of sausages, as if she couldn't resist doing them a pronounced, underhanded violence.
It's the aggression she feels towards her children.
What's that?
It's the aggression she feels towards her children.
The aggression she feels towards her children. Why do you say that?
It seems like she's taking out her frustrations
It's an escape.
from her children.
An escape how?
I don't know.
What do you mean
Escape
escape?
from her frustration, from her, just what he was saying.
It's a vent.
A vent. A
She's
vent.
venting it out.
I don't think her children, I think her husband.
Yeah.
Why do you think her husband?
I don't know.
That's where the Freudian part comes in.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you know, you've heard lots of people talk about things like that in literature where they say, whoa, that's really Freudian, you know, that sausage is an image, you know, of the male sex organ or something like that, right? And it probably is that way in the poem, right? And even as a little kid somewhere I was registering that my mother was grinding those sausages a little too fiercely, you know? But I didn't understand it, you know? And 35 years later or something, it comes out, and I understand it. See, I didn't think that thought, though. It was just always, you know, an experience of mine somewhere that I could remember and understand anew because of writing. I didn't have it planned out. I didn't know it was there, you know. Then I understood something after I'd written it. Okay? Has this ever happened to you when you write something? Here's another one. This is another exercise we do in class where I have them go out on a treasure hunt, right? And I say, go out and find something you can bring back into the classroom when holding in your hand, right? So everybody goes out and they course, they're still conscious. They're still full of themselves. And they go out and they find some juicy thing that, they think, oh, Jaeger's going to have us write on this thing. So they find some juicy, precious thing that they really would like to write about. And I have them sit in their circle when they get back in the classroom. And I say, okay, well, look at your object and study it and taste it and touch it and feel it and all that stuff again. And then I say, pass it to the right. And that's what, the person to the right is going to write about the object that they were just handed after they've really studied a different object. Now they're going to write about the object that they're just handed. Well, I sit in that circle too. And from my left there, somebody handed me a guldarn grapefruit. That's the last thing on earth I would have chosen to write about is a grapefruit, And I was almost a little mad when I thought, oh, that student, they are so dumb. How would they, a grapefruit. You can't make a poem out of a grapefruit. And I'm thinking, I'm going to fail. I'm not going to be able to do it. My students are going to see me fail. There's no poem in a grapefruit, right? But all I can do again is just begin. I have no idea where I'm going, I just have to set out, and I just begin writing down the very first things that come, and usually they're images, and the images become stories, and stories lead me to meaning, okay? And surprises. So here's the poem. It's called Sweet Citrus. Sweet Citrus. I remember walking the alleys in Tucson, looking for grapefruit limbs hanging over high redwood fences to the best homes. I just wanted to eat, but the season was late and so many others had prowled the same neighborhoods before me. I spied a few yellow globes way out of reach. I guess I could have knocked on someone's door to ask, but I was dirty. The heel of one boot had pulled loose and the nails made blood on my socks. What if they let me through the house and asked I should remove my shoes? But I didn't worry about that so much as I knew they'd say no. So I stared at those few grapefruit hung high up and wondered what to do. I threw a stick to knock them down. No luck. I grabbed hold of a lower branch and shook the tree. Nothing. I climbed the boards of the fence until my head crested over the backyard carpet of green and the lapping waters of a turquoise pool. I saw a girl about my age, maybe still in school, lounging with a tall glass of lemonade. She was so lovely to look at, a new hunger filled me, made me foolish enough to stare. Soon she glanced up, curiously, like I was a squirrel or monkey in that tree. She wasn't afraid. She uncrossed her legs, set down the drink, and boldly came toward me. There were several huge grapefruits nesting in the lawn. I swear in her small hands they seemed big as basketballs. She lobbed two underhanded over the fence. The third she aimed at me. I reached and missed it. Our eyes met directly. Maybe this is how a stray dog thinks. I was starving for someone to love me. Now get out of here, she said, before my dad calls the cops. Okay, I wrote that and I thought, where the heck did that come from? And I, sort of wandered around with that thought in my mind for a couple of days. That this whole little scene, you follow the story, street kid or something in the alleys in Tucson looking for something to eat and sees grapefruits hanging over the fence and tries to get them. Goes up there, climbs the fence, sees a girl, has this interaction with that girl, and comes to that conclusion, maybe this is how a stray dog thinks. That line really shocked me when I wrote it. Maybe this is how a stray dog thinks. I didn't know where that came from. But several days later, I realized that I had been to Tucson when I was about your age, and I was really shocked because I grew up in northern Wisconsin. It was the first time I ever saw that oranges and grapefruits grow on trees. I thought they came from stores. And all of a sudden, there they were, the trees. And it was really a shock to me. And I also remember that it was shocking to me in Tucson how all the roads were really, really straight. And so that when you went down a road and you looked in the alley, you looked down at the alley and went on and on and on forever. And I could see branches hanging over all those fences in the alley, and there were grapefruits and oranges on them. And so I hadn't even thought of that since it was years after I had been to Tucson, that particular instance, the first time in my life, and saw those things, had those impressions. And years later, it comes out in this little story in the poem. Because I forced myself, or I was forced to, say something about that grapefruit. I didn't think beforehand. I didn't think, Well, now I'm gonna tell a story about this kid in Tucson looking for something to eat, and so he's trying to get the fruit that grows there in people's yards. I didn't think that. It just came because a grapefruit came. You guys are awful quiet. So see what I'm doing is I'm telling you over and over about the poems come in the act of writing, that you write to find out, that you don't think them out beforehand. Some sorts of writing you think out beforehand. I don't think a poem you do. Here's another example of how poems come though. Robert Frost said, out of quarrels with each other we make politics, but out of quarrels with ourselves we make poetry. Out of quarrels with each other we make politics and war, and out of quarrels with ourselves we make poetry. Okay? Well, this is a poem, for instance, where I had a little quarrel with myself. I have a daughter back in Iowa now. She's a little bit older than most of you. She's like 19 or something now. But she used to come out to Montana in the summers, and she's a real shopping mall kind of girl, you know. And of course, so she wasn't very happy in northern Montana. There's where we have little or no shopping up there. And she hates hiking and stuff like that, and I just wanted to go hiking and things like that. And so finally, one summer she says, okay, Dad, you can take me hiking. I'll go once, you know. So I decided that I'm going to take her up on Mount Reynolds in Glacier Park, you know, right up on top of the pass. There's this Mount Reynolds, and it looks like a really, really dramatic climb, but it's really pretty, you know, safe and not terribly hard or anything. But so I'm going to take her up there, and we're going up there, and she's doing it for Dad, you know, and I'm feeling pretty good about that. And we get up there pretty high, and we get to this place where you sort of pick your way through the rocks, and you have to kind of walk over these ledges, and all of a sudden, boom, clouds everywhere. Just, we can't even hardly see each other, you know, can't see where we're going, can't see where we came from. You know, my daughter's there, and she's crying, and I'm standing right next to her on the ledge, and I'm pretending not to cry, you know, but we're both pretty panicked, you know, and you know, we have this dad-daughter moment, you know, and I'm thinking, this is going to be a poem, you know, this poem about dad and daughter out on this hike. And sure enough, pretty soon the sky cleared up, and we walked to the top, and we ate our peanut butter sandwiches, and everything was just hunky-dory, you know, and I got home and I thought, I'm going to write that poem about my dad and a daughter go out and they do this thing, this bonding thing or something, you know. And for the first stanza of this poem, I was really on that track, and you can hear how stupid it is, you know, right? It says, I'm holding my breath on a crumbling ledge over 100 meters of vertical face. I've unstrapped whatever I could to steady my back against the rock that pushes out behind. Thick fog has descended to surround me. I'm blinded, panicked to see I can't see even the next precious foothold, up or down. A wind slaps the side of my head, and at that point in writing the poem, I just absolutely stopped dead. So I literally in the book that I scribble in, I just put ... See, I was doing this dad-daughter poem, and I'm really full of myself, and I really know where I'm going, and I've got something to say, right? And I'm stopped dead. ... I'm frozen again. I'm stuck on that ledge, you know. And here comes the real poem all of a sudden. All of a sudden, I start thinking about my old Sunday school teacher. She's this great big woman who wore these long dresses, and whenever she walked, I could never see her feet, so she looked like she floated everywhere, you know? She just floated around. I thought, how does she do that, you know? And so here I am, I'm trapped on this ledge, you know, and maybe that's really what goes through my mind, you know, is all of a sudden I'm thinking, wish I could float like she did, you know? That would save me now, you know? But so you know what I do? You know, instead of trying to corral the poem, trying to make it do what I want to do, I decide, okay, now I'll start writing about my old Sunday school teacher, because that's where it wants to go. Okay, so watch how this happens. Here's the poem. It's called, I love this title too, it's so pretentious, Climber's Log, Mount Reynolds. You hear that? Okay, so then it goes through the first stanza, and you heard that already, but I'll read it again. I'm holding my breath on a crumbling ledge over hundreds of meters of vertical face. I've unstrapped whatever I could to steady my back against the rock that pushes out behind. Thick fog has descended to surround me. I'm blinded, panicked to see I can't see even the next precious foothold up or down. The wind slaps the side of my head, and the damnedest memory walks out of that gauze haze. The silky blue pleated dress around the inflated girth of my old Sunday school teacher. were beyond her hips balloon, the silk swished down below her ankles, so that she stood there in front of me as if her great weight floated in the air. I still blush to recall her finger wagging in my face, and her rosy jowls set with resolve to avenge some rudeness she held I'd committed, though I sure as hell couldn't recall. "Just say you're sorry," she almost whispered, because all the other rows of suddenly hushed kids weren't supposed to hear. All this distance beyond those days, I finally choke out a little laugh as if in reply. Half sweet, like I still claimed my innocence, half bitter, like I was trying to hack up something out of the depths of me and spit it away. And now my head hung low and my toes wriggled, as if my climbing boots were those black tie-up shoes I'd polished after my bath the night before. Did I cry back then? It's been a rough climb for me to get past the holy spook those Lutherans burned inside my crew-cut brain. I simply shook my head again and again and said all over, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." And damn, the sky's open. The trail cleared. God damn. The instant I looked up at her, she's been gone 30 years. See how that happens? You know? Now I'm afraid what happens sometimes in school is people would read a poem like that and they'd think about what the author was hiding there for them to figure out. It was as big a surprise to me, you know, as it was to anybody else. I'll give you an example of another surprise. Here's a poem that a kid in Flathead High School taught me about. I wrote it, but a kid in Flathead High School taught me about it. All right? It's called On My 39th Birthday. I live in Yellow Bay, you know, along Flathead Lake. And usually I don't teach during the summer, but one summer there I had to teach, and I was turning 39 that summer. My birthday's in July, and it just happened I had to go to work on my birthday. And it's this beautiful sunny day, and I'm driving into Kalispell through Big Fork, and you know, Big Fork, you cross that bridge over where the Swan River comes under the highway, it flows out in the lake, and the high school kids climb the rails on that bridge and they dive off into the water, right? And just as I'm driving by, you know, they climb those rails and they hold up their hands and they wave at me and laugh and scream and they jump off into the water, and I drive by and I think, them damn kids, somebody ought to pass a law against them doing that. That's really rotten. They're going to get hurt. They shouldn't be able to climb up on the rails like that and do all that thing. And all of a sudden I thought, what's wrong with me? You know? What am I doing? You know? And all of a sudden it hit me, my God, they were beautiful. Those kids were beautiful. They were bronzed and muscular and beaming in the sunlight and having fun, and it looked just wonderful. And then all of a sudden I went back to, but somebody ought to make a law against that. They're going to hurt themselves. They can't do it. They're going to make an accident on that bridge. And all of a sudden, see, out of quarrels with yourself, you know, see that again? Remember Robert Frost said, out of quarrels with each other, we make politics. Out of quarrels with ourselves, we make a poem. So I get to work, you know, and I've really got this sort of thing going around in my stomach, you know. Pass a law against it. Wow, I want to do that. Pass a law against it. Wow, I want to do that. Pass a law. See that? You know what I mean? Do you ever feel like that? Do you ever get that? You know? A little war going on inside, you know? And so I got to work, and what did I do? I just started scribbling this thing down. And pretty soon, the first thing I do is I make the picture. I make the image. And the image leads me to kind of a story, and the story leads me to a meaning. But I don't know it's there before I get there. So here's the poem, On My 39th Birthday. 4 sun-toasted bodies lean and daring to leap from the bridge over the highway as I drive by. 3 boys in cutoffs, 1 red-headed flower in an orchid 2-piece blossoming. Old Sol beats on them with 90 degrees in the early summer of their lives, and I should worry for them as they climb the guardrails, lock arms, scream, plunge into currents of frothy mountain runoff. But someone else can legislate against this foolishness, warn them of rocks, sinkholes, snags, and snakebite. I say let them fly into the arms of whatever misfortunes await them. Give them this one perfect day of temptation, to burn flesh on their shoulders and calves, to laugh in the face of gravity, point their toes and slice into water so cold it made my jaw ache. After one of those responsible days, I felt worse than half used up. So I stumbled down there near the splash kneeled and scooped my palms to drink. Okay, I read that at Flathead High School, and a kid said to me, I understand that allusion you're making there in the last stanza. And right away, as the writer of the poem, I go, inside I'm going, what allusion in that last stanza? So I say to the kid, oh, you do? Well, tell us about it, And he says, well, you're alluding to Ponce de Leon. And I think, I've been to high school, and I vaguely remembered Ponce de Leon. He was like one of those explorer guys, And so I said, well, tell us what about Ponce de Leon? And he said, well, Ponce de Leon, he's that Spanish explorer that was looking for the fountain of youth. So I stumbled down there near the splash, kneeled, and scooped my palms to drink. Now, when I wrote this poem, I wasn't thinking about Ponce de Leon. But you know what? There's something in our culture about regretting getting old. I was just regretting getting old. And you know what? Back then in the days of Ponce de Leon, whoever sent him off on his big journey, that'd be sort of like sending the space shuttle off to find the fountain of youth. It was like expensive. These were adults. This was expensive equipment and soldiers and stuff that they were sending out looking for this place where you could kneel down and scoop your palms to drink and be 17 again. Because it hurt getting old. And it's hurt in this culture for centuries and centuries and centuries. And I was just participating in that pain of getting old. And I wanted to kneel and scoop my palms to drink. And so I didn't allude to anything back there. The poem did. My life did, maybe. My feelings did, maybe. But I didn't consciously make an allusion for people to figure out later on. Now, it helped me appreciate the poem a lot more when that reader told me what was there. When the reader told me what was there, I finally understood a lot about this poem. Before that time, I didn't. How much time we got?
3-4 minutes.
I'm going to read just real quickly another choral poem then. This is about driving the High Line, going to different high schools. And again, what happens is it's a little quarrel in my stomach where I'm going through one of these towns. It's just getting really monotonous up there, right? Highway's really straight and it's flat, and town after town after town, they all start looking exactly alike. And I come through this one town, and here's this pair of high school kids walking up the road towards me. He's in a leather jacket, she's all dressed up. They're holding hands, they're walking down the road. And as I go by, they wave at me, just goofing off, and I just wave back. And I start driving out of town, I go, oh, good, they're in love, And I'm a little stomach, and I think, what's wrong with me? I'm really glad they're in love. My stomach really, and I go, it's good they're in love. That's a good thing. I'm happy for them. My stomach hurts, So I get to Glasgow and I get in my hotel room, I whip out my notebook and I just start writing. And here's what comes. It's called Wish I Could Shake Them Up. All day this highway strings no-name towns like crude stones, a rosary in the hands of a worried man. Here's another. Water tower, empty boxcars, grain elevator, pickup loads of hay bales parked in front of the first bar, some cars hid beside the other. Gas pumps at the only grocery store in town. Barren schoolyard. Behind the old brick gymnasium, the district's fleet. 3 yellow buses likely sick to death of vomit and sticky hands. But I don't hear anyone complain, not even slow as I'm barely over the limit. Glad I've gas enough not to be idle in the midst of old folks here, passing these storefronts on to young folks, doomed to be old folks before too long. Fact is, they even seem to like it, or haven't a clue of anything other than years tagged or tallied the market worth of one crop into the next. This couple of kids, for instance, holding hands on the highway, he and she look up, smile sweetly as I drive by, and I'd bet he won that letter as a wrestler, captain of the team. He's seen the 6 o'clock news, ragged lunatics sleeping in the alleys, drug runners driving Cadillacs, race riots and war. And he'd be the senator someday who'd do something about it. And she's the class brain, even in math, though she loves Frost and she can read Cummings and she knows Platt best of all. She has no one to talk with. And someday she'd say it all in a book for others like herself who tremble to read and catch their lives lived countless times before. So I want to roll my window and yell, no, not yet, you're too young. I want to warn him, If he hasn't got her already pregnant, she's going to be soon. Her old man has no better sense than to shotgun a marriage and share with his son-in-law the hellish boredom of 8 hours a day in his hardware store, counting out pounds of nails. I want to convince her she's worth legions of men willing to stand in line. I'd like to shake her up with the odds. Young lady, I'd say, you're bound to be caught short of breath one day, lost inside one of these clapboard bungalows, 2 babies crying in the next room, and you're at the window staring at your hometown growing small. Up the drive, hubby's home for lunch. He bangs in the door with paint-stained shoes, won't look at you even though he's known now for 2 years. Something gnawing in him haunts you too. Dreams, you see, will nag you to distraction unless you run far enough away like your neighbors, like your friends have run off into the comforts of their little padded weeks of bridge parties, bowling nights, shopping malls, gossip and sex and booze. That's life, they'll shrug. That's life. And if you feel sick with disappointment, don't believe for an instant it's easier once you break loose. Find yourself driving through one town, blowing like a lost seed of milkweed into the next, wandering no farther than another motel mattress, and praying for 2 kids waving back up the road, wishing for them enough pain and confusion to wake up years forward still dreaming, driving out of town like a stranger, born again and delivered through darkness, but this time each of us into his own hands. That was the answer to that choral for me. See you again. Thank you. Gathering rejections in the finest places.
Outstanding.
Okay?
And
then he can make a copy for you.
You've got the bridge one in here?
Yeah.
Super.
Yeah, it's called my 39th birthday.
I've seen a lot of that stuff with like the finger, nothing that serious.
Tell you what, I gotta give you this. There's a book of poems you can have. You sound like you're the person who can do this. Okay.